Most horror sequels die in the shadow of the first. They recycle scares, repeat monsters, and leave no lasting fear. But a rare few rise above. These are the sequels that don't just continue the story, they corrupt it, sharpen it, and drag it into deeper darkness. They take what was terrifying and make it worse, turning survival into suffering and hope into ash. We've gathered the 10 sequels that refused to die, the ones that came back stronger, bloodier, and more terrifying than the originals. The sequel doesn't crawl in the shadow of the first. It tears its way out and proves it can stand taller. The opening alone makes that clear. Where the first film trapped you in silence from the start, this one explodes with noise. A baseball game buzzing with life, the sky tearing open, and creatures crashing down like meteors of flesh and teeth. It doesn't hide the monsters anymore. In fact, it shows you how it all began, how the world collapsed in a single heartbeat, and the chaos of that day makes the dread of silence that follows feel even heavier. The scope is broader. In the first film, the family's farm was both cage and battleground, small in scale but suffocating in tension. Here, the Abbotts step into the open, walking barefoot across ash and ruin, and the world feels larger, crueler. Lee is gone, but his absence gives Regan and Evelyn sharper edges. They're no longer only survivors. They're forced to carry the story forward without the man who once shielded them. That shift makes the danger bite deeper, because every mistake now feels permanent. The sequel also dares to ask what the first only hinted at. What happens when silence isn't the only enemy? Emmett's presence answers that. Broken, bitter, and hollow, he's proof that survival doesn't save the soul, it corrodes it. His contrast with Regan highlights the film's evolution. In part 1, survival was reactive. In part 2, it's active, driven by her will to fight, to turn her father's sacrifice into a weapon that can spread beyond their family. And then there's the island. The first film never gave an inch of safety, but the sequel lures you with it. People laughing, living, breathing without fear, and then destroys it in seconds. It's a cruel reminder that comfort is fragile, and no one escapes the reach of this world. In the final act, Regan doesn't just discover a weapon, she broadcasts it. While Marcus uses it to save his family, Regan drives steel through the monster herself, claiming her father's legacy. The first Terrifier introduced art as a force of chaos. It was grim, shocking, and unapologetic. But it lived mostly as an endurance test, a string of brutal set pieces tied together by atmosphere. The sequel doesn't abandon that cruelty, but it grows larger, meaner, and stranger in ways the first film never dared. Terrifier 2 isn't just a return to bloodshed. It's a reinvention of what this character can mean. The difference begins with scale. Where the first film trapped characters in alleys and basements, the second expands into homes, schools, parties, and finally, a carnival hellscape. The violence doesn't just arrive, it invades every corner of Miles County, suggesting art's presence isn't random, but fated. The sense of myth is what sets it apart. That myth centers on Sienna, a protagonist the first film never had. She isn't just another victim cycling through art's sadism. Her father's drawings and her angel costume turn the film into something mythic, a battle where good doesn't simply survive, but pushes back. Her journey provides a weight the original lacked, and it gives the audience someone to root for beyond plain survival. Then there's the brutality itself. The first film shocked, the second unsettled by refusing to cut away. The infamous bedroom scene with Allie isn't just gore, it's commitment to showing pain as a slow unraveling, pushing past horror into something almost surreal. It's the moment that defines the sequel's identity. Not quicker, but deeper, forcing viewers to sit with the nightmare. Finally, The ending pushes the series into new territory. Where the first film ended with Art's apparent death, the sequel twists into rebirth, aligning him with supernatural inevitability. The hospital birth scene doesn't just promise more carnage, it declares Art unstoppable. Terrifier 2 is not only bloodier than its predecessor, it's bigger, bolder, and far more disturbing. The kind of sequel that makes the original look like a rough draft. The first part trapped its audience in a cruel cycle, one victim at a time, consumed by something no one else could see. It worked because of its simplicity, but it also boxed itself in. Smile 2 tears down that box and builds something larger, sharper, and far more unpredictable. This time the curse doesn't stay in one person's head. It spreads, infecting entire groups, shifting its weight from a personal nightmare into something closer to an outbreak. That single change alters the whole rhythm. Where the first film whispered inevitability, the sequel claws forward with momentum, dragging more people into its orbit and leaving the viewer unsure who can be trusted. The entity itself feels more aggressive. Instead of saving its true form for the ending, it twists spaces and warps reality throughout, making safety a lie at every turn. You don't wait for a reveal. You're crushed under it again and again. And then the ending. Smile closed on certainty. Rose was doomed. Smile 2 refuses such closure. Survival here comes fractured, tainted, leaving characters and audience alike unsure whether anyone really escaped. That uncertainty is what makes the sequel stronger. The first was a nightmare. The second feels like the nightmare doesn't stop even when you're awake. Where Scream shocked by reinventing the slasher, its sequel doubled down on scale and ambition. Scream 2 doesn't creep, it explodes. The first 10 minutes set the tone, ripping open a crowded theater where horror fans watch fiction and end up living it, trapped in a frenzy of screams and blood. It's not just a murder. It's a spectacle, a statement that no place, not even a public space, is safe. Sydney's life in college should have been her reset, but the film refuses her peace. Every corner of campus feels wired with tension, every face a potential mask. The sequel sharpens its commentary, pointing a knife at how media, classmates, and strangers turn Sydney into a headline, stripping her pain into entertainment. That angle gives the killings more bite, turning Ghostface from a slasher into a cultural disease she can't get rid of. When the final curtain falls, the killers aren't just random. Mickey embodies obsession with fame, a murderer who sees mass killing as a shortcut to notoriety. Debbie Loomis drags in the old wound of vengeance, tying the new spree to the legacy of the first film. The showdown inside the theater closes the loop, life and horror collapsing on the stage. Sydney survives, but survival feels temporary. Scream 2 proves Ghostface isn't a person, he's an idea, and ideas don't die. The first Conjuring dragged us into a farmhouse drowning in shadows, proving James Wan could resurrect old-school horror with cruel precision. But The Conjuring 2 is darker, heavier, and far more suffocating. Where the first film felt like a nightmare creeping through wooden walls in the American countryside, the sequel drags us into the damp, choking streets of Enfield, London, where even the smallest rooms feel like traps. The setting itself is a prison, ordinary brick and plaster, twisted into a cage where voices bleed from the walls and shadows whisper your name. The Warrens return, but this time they aren't the calm saviors we saw before. They are already haunted, already unraveling. Lorraine is stalked by the image of something more poisonous than the farmhouse demon of the first film. A figure in holy robes, a mockery of faith, a face carved into a nun's mask. This is no accident. Wan ties the haunting to Lorraine's soul, making the battle more intimate, more venomous. In the first film, The Warrens were strong. Here, they feel hunted, their strength rotting under the weight of the demon's stare. At the center of it all is Janet Hodgson, a child crushed under a presence too heavy for her bones. In The Conjuring, possession felt shocking. In The Conjuring 2, it feels merciless. Janet's voice deepens, her body cracks and bends, and through her comes Bill Wilkins, a ghost hiding something worse. The chair scene, where Janet's body is overtaken without a single camera cut, is not just frightening, it's suffocating, as if the audience itself is trapped in the room, forced to watch the infection of evil spread. The ending brings false relief. Lorraine names the demon, Valak, and the grip loosens. But unlike the farmhouse victory of the first film, this feels hollow. Evil does not leave, it lingers, watching, promising a painful return. John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978 defined the slasher blueprint: a masked figure, an ordinary town, and a girl who refused to die. But the 2018 sequel didn't just revisit that legend, it took it to a whole new level. Where the original thrived on minimalism and suggestion, this return digs into what 40 years of trauma does to both predator and prey. Michael Myers remains the same faceless embodiment of violence, silent and unstoppable. But this time, the killings land with heavier weight. The film doesn't linger on shadows or slow stalking like the first. It explodes with raw, unflinching brutality. Every strike feels crueler, more matter-of-fact, reminding us that Michael isn't a ghost story. He's flesh, steel, and endless malice. What elevates this sequel is Laurie Strode herself. In 1978, she was the resourceful babysitter fighting to survive the night. In 2018, she's a hardened survivor whose entire life has been shaped by that encounter. Her home is a fortress, her mind consumed with preparation. The film transforms her from a final girl into a full-fledged warrior, showing the cost of survival as well as its strength. Even the ending reframes the story. The original ended with ambiguity. Michael vanished, his presence lingering everywhere. Here, Laurie traps him in her own home, burning it down around him. It's not just survival anymore. It's a reckoning. Halloween, 2018, honors the past but reclaims the myth, proving that 40 years later, Laurie Strode's fight carries more power than ever. 28 Weeks Later doesn't try to copy the raw chaos of 28 Days Later, it sharpens it. The first film was intimate, focused on a handful of survivors stumbling through a collapsed London. It gave us empty streets, slow dread, and the terrifying speed of the infected. But the sequel expands the scope. Instead of survival in the ruins, it asks the harder question: what happens when governments try to rebuild? The setup is colder and more structured than the first movie. The military seals off safe zones, refugees trickle back, and life seems possible again. It feels almost optimistic until it falls apart. Where 28 Days Later was about the shock of collapse, 28 Weeks Later is about the impossibility of control. One mistake, one kiss between Don and his infected wife, is enough to bring the whole system crashing down. The sequel also pushes the violence further. Helicopters mow down crowds, firebombs scorch entire districts, and soldiers are ordered to kill civilians alongside the infected. The horror isn't only in the monsters, it's in the response. And the ending twists the knife deeper than the original. Jim, Selena, and Hannah in 28 Days Later found fragile hope. In this one, the children escaped, but they carry the virus with them. Red Dragon lives in the shadow of the Silence of the Lambs, where Demi's classic gave us Clarice Starling and the nightmare of Buffalo Bill. Red Dragon rewinds the story to show the case that first bound Will Graham to Hannibal Lecter. It's darker in tone, less about the psychological battle between student and mentor, and more about the destructive cost of hunting monsters. Unlike Clarice, Will is already damaged. His encounter with Lecter nearly killed him, and retirement is his only escape. But when the Tooth Fairy begins slaughtering families, he's dragged back in. That makes Red Dragon more personal than the Silence of the Lambs. It's not an origin story of Lecter, but an origin story of Graham's scars. The film explores the toll of obsession, showing him risking his sanity and family to stop a killer who mirrors his own darkness. Where The Silence of the Lambs thrives on atmosphere and mystery, Red Dragon builds intensity through inevitability. The Tooth Fairy, played with terrifying fragility, isn't just a monster, but a man twisted by abuse, longing for transformation. The killings are brutal, but his humanity makes them even harder to watch. And then there's Lecter. In Silence of the Lambs, he's mythic, a devil in glass. In Red Dragon, he's fresher, closer to the wound, a predator Graham barely survived. That history gives their exchanges more weight. Two men who know each other too well, circling one final time. Cloverfield was chaos. A shaky cam monster rampage that dropped audiences right into the middle of New York's destruction. It was raw, loud, and relentless. But 10 Cloverfield Lane took that same universe and proved tension doesn't need skyscrapers collapsing or monsters roaring. It proved fear can be claustrophobic. The first film thrived on spectacle. Buildings falling, bridges collapsing, the Statue of Liberty's head rolling down the street, all adrenaline, little time to breathe. 10 Cloverfield Lane flips the formula. It locks us in a bunker, shrinks the canvas, and makes the terror about control, manipulation, and survival. Michelle isn't just running from monsters. She's trapped with one in human form. Howard is a villain far scarier than Cloverfield's beast. The monster outside is unknowable, but Howard is a predator we can understand. Paranoid, unstable, masking menace with kindness. Every word, every gesture feels like a countdown to violence. The bunker is a prison, coffin, and stage for one of the most unnerving character battles in modern horror. And then, just when you think it's over, that Michelle's escape is victory, the film tilts back into sci-fi terror. Unlike the first movie, where humanity was always powerless, 10 Cloverfield Lane gives us a fighter. Michelle chooses not just survival, but resistance, driving straight toward the war instead of away from it. The original Candyman from 1992 was a terrifying story about one man, Daniel Robitaille, who became a ghost after being murdered in a brutal, racist attack. It worked because it mixed urban legends with real fear, showing how stories can live on in communities. But the 2021 version takes the idea much further, making it bigger and darker. In Candyman, 2021, the curse is not tied to just one man. It is a cycle. Every time an innocent black man is killed in violence and injustice, he becomes part of Candyman. This change makes the story stronger. It isn't just about one ghost from the past. It's about centuries of pain living inside the mirror, a swarm of voices instead of one. The legend now feels alive, evolving, and impossible to stop. Visually, the 2021 film is also more powerful. The body horror of Anthony's transformation is disturbing, with his skin rotting and bees crawling from his wounds. The violence is brutal and more shocking than the original. But more than blood, the film connects the curse directly to the modern world. Police brutality, gentrification, and how stories of violence keep repeating. The ending is another big difference. In 1992, Candyman ended as a ghostly legend, still haunting Cabrini Green. In 2021, Anthony becomes the new Candyman, his body and soul fully taken by the curse. Instead of one ghost passing the torch, The film shows the curse is eternal, built from many lives, and will never vanish. That makes the newer film heavier, scarier, and more meaningful than the first. And that's a wrap on the best horror sequels that proved lightning can strike twice. Whether it was bloodier, scarier, or just downright smarter than the original, these films kept the nightmares alive in unforgettable ways. Horror sequels don't always get it right, but when they do, they become cult classics we keep revisiting. Got a favorite sequel I missed? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your picks. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.